Guys, it's me, Miss Norris, and today I'd like to share an interesting read aloud with you in honor of Black History Month. Today I'm going to be sharing the story Counting on Katherine. Counting on Katherine was written in 2018 by Helaine Becker and illustrated by Dow Phumiruk, and it tells the true story of how Katherine Johnson saved Apollo 13, which is a rocket that went to outer space. If you're ready to hear the story, I'm ready to share it with you. Here we go. Counting on Katherine. You can see all of her calculations and math that she's doing. And when a picture of her, an illustration of her as she's a little older. Katherine loved to count. She counted the steps to the road, the steps up to church, the number of dishes and spoons she washed in the bright white sink. Katherine loved to count. And that love of counting started when she was just a young girl. The only things she didn't count were the stars in the sky. Only a fool, she thought, would try that. Even so, the stars sparked her imagination. What was out there? Katherine yearned to know as much as she could about the numbers, about the universe, about everything. You can see that she's gazing out at that night sky, up at the stars, and her imagination has made her curious about what more could be out there. Katherine's boundless curiosity turned her into a star student. She was so bright, she skipped 3 whole grades. She catapulted right past her brother. He wasn't too happy about that. You can see that she is at school and she loves school. By the time she turned 10, Katherine was ready for high school. But back then, America was legally separated by race. Her town's high school didn't admit black students of any age. So it wasn't that she was just too young, it's that there wasn't a high school for black students to attend. Can you imagine that time? Katherine burned with fury. She wanted more than anything to keep learning. There was still so much to know. Imagine how mad you would be if you weren't allowed to continue to go to school, even though that was the thing you loved the very most. Count on me, Katherine's father told her. By working night and day, he earned enough money to move the family to a town with a black high school. So you can see this is White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia. And they're moving to Institute, West Virginia. So they're moving quite a ways so that Katherine can have the opportunity to go to high school. Katherine loved high school. She was good at every subject, but math was still her favorite. She dreamed of becoming a research mathematician, making discoveries about the number patterns that are the foundations of our universe. In those days, though, there were no jobs as research mathematicians for women. Professions most available to them were teaching and nursing. So Katherine became an elementary school teacher. She liked her job and she loved her students, but she never stopped dreaming about exploring numbers. So she loved high school and wanted to be a math researcher. But there weren't any jobs for women, not just black people, but women. There weren't any jobs for women to be mathematicians. Women could be teachers or nurses. And for some people, being a teacher or a nurse is wonderful. I love it. But not for Katherine. That wasn't enough. She kept dreaming about exploring numbers. In the 1950s, the U.S. government's National Advisory Committee on Aeronautics, NACA, hired thousands of new employees. It even started hiring black women as mathematicians. Katherine heard about the mathematician jobs. Her heart raced with excitement. Perhaps her dream could come true after all. But when she applied for one of the positions, she was told they were already filled. Katherine had to wait a whole year until new spots opened up. Her patience paid off, and she got the job. So lots of people wanted to be mathematicians for NACA, and the positions all got filled, so Katherine had to wait. But she finally got the job. A few years later, the Soviet Union sent a rocket ship into space, launching a space race with the United States. NACA was rolled into a new space agency, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, what we now know as NASA. Katherine now found herself at the heart of America's space program. She worked as a computer, and electronic computers were not widely used yet, calculating long series of numbers. All the computers were women. They were given the tasks that men thought were boring and unimportant. That didn't bother Katherine. She knew that without her contributions, a spaceship couldn't reach its destination, nor could it safely return to Earth. So this is Katherine's offices at NASA, which is what we still have today, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. And they didn't have computers then. Humans were the computers. And they wanted women to do it because men thought that job was boring and not that important. But Katherine knew better. And here's why. Sending a rocket ship into space is like throwing a ball into the air. At first, the force of the throw sends the ball up, up, up. But as its energy runs out, the ball's path curves back toward the ground. Where it lands depends on what angle it was thrown and how high and how fast it flew. Because math is a kind of language, Katherine could ask those questions. How high would the rocket ship go, and how fast would it travel? Using numbers. And numbers would provide the all-important answer. Where would it land? To find out, Katherine plotted the numbers she'd calculated on a graph. When she joined the points together, they formed a curved line. At one end of that line was Earth at the time the rocket ship launched. At the other was where Earth would be when the ship landed. So this is pretty complicated because things are moving up, but the Earth is also spinning and moving. And so to find the right place where the ball is going to land is very difficult and takes very advanced math skills. Katherine's reputation for accuracy and strong leadership skills, she was known for asking plenty of questions, got her promoted to Project Mercury, a new program designed to send the first American astronauts into space. Mercury's missions were going to be dangerous, so dangerous that even the project's star astronaut, John Glenn, refused to fly unless Katherine okayed the numbers. "You can count on me," she said. Glenn's spacecraft Friendship 7 orbited Earth 3 times and returned home safely. Glenn became a national hero. So when the first United States person went to outer space, he wouldn't land until Katherine said that the numbers worked. And he orbited 3 times and was able to come home safely. Everyone called him the hero. But let's think about who that real hero might have been. Katherine was promoted again. Now she was asked to calculate the flight paths for Project Apollo, the first flights to the moon. "Count on me," she said. Remember, her dad told her the same thing. On July 20th, 1969, the Apollo 11 astronauts walked on the moon. Their feat was celebrated around the world. More triumphs followed. Apollo 12 rocketed to the moon in November 1969. So people were starting to land on the moon, and everyone thought it was super duper amazing. It is. So Apollo 11 did great. Apollo 12 did great. Apollo 13 launched on April 11th, 1970. But on the third day of Apollo 13's flight, the worst thing happened. An explosion in space. Dun, dun, dun! Could the crippled spaceship make it to the moon? And if it didn't, would it be able to get back to Earth? The 3 astronauts on board were in grave peril. Peril's another word for danger. Commander Jim Lovell told Mission Control, "Houston, we've had a problem." So there was an explosion in space, and the astronauts that were inside Apollo 13 didn't die, but they were in a lot of danger. And they let the people back at NASA know, "We have a problem." Back on Earth, Katherine Johnson got a phone call. Her flight path calculations would have to be done all over again, and perfectly. It would be the toughest challenge of her life. Katherine told Mission Control, "You can count on me." She rolled up her sleeves, took a deep breath, and began doing the math. So you see, she needs to figure how to get Apollo 13 back onto this path. She worked hard and fast. A few hours later, Katherine's calculations were finished. The flight path to return home would take the ship around the far side of the moon. From there, the moon's gravity would act like a slingshot and zing the ship back to Earth. To get home, the crew of Apollo 13 would have to follow Katherine's course exactly by burning off fuel at precise intervals. So they had to listen to exactly what Katherine said. If the astronauts made a mistake, their ship would drift through space forever. So this is a pretty big deal. Katherine waited anxiously to hear the astronauts' report. Finally, it crackled over the loudspeaker. "We've got it." Apollo 13 was back on track. So you can see all the NASA guys are high-fiving and cheering and watching as Apollo 13 was able to parachute back to Earth. And Katherine's just as excited. Katherine Johnson had done it. She'd brought Apollo 13 home. She was no longer the kid who dreamed of what lay beyond the stars. She was now a star herself. You can see that she's still looking up at that moon and probably doing math in her head, imagining the different patterns and numbers of the sky. The end. But ladies and gentlemen, like I said, Katherine Johnson was a real person, and I'm going to read you a little bit more about the real Katherine and her amazing life. So stay tuned. Katherine Johnson was born on August 26, 1918 in White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia. Her mother was a teacher. Katherine assumed she'd grow up to be a teacher too. She did, remember. From her youngest days, it was clear to everyone that Katherine was extremely bright. When she officially started school, she went straight into second grade. Later, she skipped grade 5. Katherine graduated from high school at 14 and West Virginia State College at 18. Her first job was teaching math in Marion, Virginia. She loved helping her students learn and encouraged them to learn from one another. "I had my students find a buddy and help each other." In 1953, Katherine got a job as a computer at Langley Aeronautical Laboratory for the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, later called NASA. To counter ingrained sexism there, she had to develop more than math skills. We needed to be assertive as women in those days, assertive and aggressive. That means you need to stick up for yourself. Still, Katherine was kept out of the research team's all-male briefings. Eventually, they got tired of answering all my questions and just Eventually they got tired of answering all my questions and just let me in. Spurred by competition with the Soviet Union, the United States ramped up its own space program in 1958, and Katherine became an aerospace technologist when her team joined NASA. By the late 1960s, NASA estimates more than 400,000 people were working on sending a man to the moon. Katherine says, "The whole idea of going into space was new and daring. There were no textbooks, we had to write them. We wrote the first textbook by hand." Katherine did her calculations on mechanical tabulating machines. By 1961, electronic computers were coming into wider use, but many people, including John Glenn, didn't trust the computer generated numbers. "Call Katherine," she remembers him saying. "If she says the number is right, I'll take it." Her role, however, always involved more than mere number crunching. It relied heavily on hunches. By letting her imagination run free, Katherine developed a key backup navigation system that used the stars as guideposts. Katherine's contributions were crucial to America's space program. She calculated the trajectory for Alan Shepard's first flight into space and devised the trajectories for space capsules and lunar landing modules. She co authored 26 scientific papers, including a groundbreaking report on the theoretical underpinnings of spaceflight. Later in her career, she worked on the space shuttle and on a satellite project that searched the globe for underground minerals and other natural resources from space. In 2015, Katherine received the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Despite her many achievements, Katherine never liked to take credit. Her reason? "Because we always worked as a team," she said. "It was never just one person." The end. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed the story, Counting on Katherine, how Katherine Johnson saved Apollo 13. If you did, please hit that thumbs up button at the bottom of the page. If you're already a subscriber, thank you so much for your support. It really means a lot to me. If you're not a subscriber yet, please hit that subscribe button down here at the bottom of the page. And don't forget to click the bell so that you're notified when there's new content. And last but certainly not least, I want to say a big thank you to the entire Howie family for being able to share their wonderful collection of books and giving me permission to share these books with you on my YouTube channel. Thank you, thank you, thank you to all of the Howies. I really appreciate you. I hope to see you all again real soon. Bye-bye.